Commander Zara Vexhi's forearms trembled as she processed the incoming transmission aboard the research station, Harmony's Edge. Her species, the Kithara, had evolved from peaceful tree dwellers on a garden world where the greatest danger was a particularly aggressive fruit. Nothing in their evolutionary history had prepared them for this moment. "Status report," she whispered, her translator struggling to convert her clicking mandibles into standard galactic. Dr. Threnody, a crystalline, silicari scientist, chimed with frequencies that registered pure terror. "Commander, the Devourer ships have breached our outer defense grid. Estimated time until they reach the station, 47 minutes. Through the viewport, space itself seemed to writhe with malevolent purpose. The Devourers weren't just a species, they were an extinction event with consciousness. For 3,000 years they had swept across the galaxy like a plague of living metal and hunger. Entire civilizations vanished in their wake, their worlds stripped bare, their people processed into raw materials for the ever-growing swarm. "Any response to our distress calls?" Zara asked, knowing the answer but clinging to hope like a drowning swimmer clutches driftwood. "The Altrurian Republic says they're evaluating the situation," Threnody chimed, his crystalline form dimming. With despair, the ethereal collective has gone silent. The trade routes are already being rerouted around this entire sector. Zara felt her heart sink. 26 different species worked on this station, representing the best scientific minds in the galaxy. Their research into quantum archaeology had promised to unlock the secrets of the universe's earliest civilizations. Now they would become just another meal for the cosmic horror bearing down on them. "Commander!" Dr. Kelrus, a reptilian Vazaki, slithered over with panic in his golden eyes. "We're receiving another transmission. It's from the restricted sector." A hush fell over the bridge. Every sapient being in the galaxy knew about the restricted sector, that dark corner of space where the Galactic Council had quarantined an entire world. The Deathworld, the planet so hostile that evolution had apparently broken, producing creatures that defied every law of biological possibility. "Patch it through," Zara commanded, her voice barely above a whisper. The transmission crackled to life, filled with static and what sounded like music. No, not music, war drums. And beneath that rhythmic pounding, voices singing in harmonies that made the Kithara's spine tingle with an emotion she couldn't name. Then a single voice cut through the noise. Calm, human, terrifying, in its complete lack of fear. "Harmonies, Edge, this is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Corps. We've received your distress call. Help is on the way." Dr. Threnady's crystals nearly shattered with shock. "Terrans? But the Council specifically forbade any contact with—" "Negative on standard rescue protocols," the human voice continued, as if she could hear them. "We're not sending help. We're sending something else entirely. Hold position. Try not to. Die before we get there. Chen out." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. What did she mean? Kelrus whispered. "If they're not sending help, then what?" The question hung in the air as proximity alarms began to wail. On the main display, the first Devourer ships appeared like wounds in reality itself. Biomechanical nightmares that seemed to absorb light and hope in equal measure. Zara watched them approach and found herself thinking about an old Kithara proverb, "When the fruit vine breaks, pray the ground is soft." She had a terrible feeling the ground was about to become very, very hard. Chapter 2. The Deathworld response. Captain Marcus Reaper Kowalski cracked his knuckles as he reviewed the tactical display aboard the UES Ragnarok. The human dreadnought hung in space like a predator waiting to strike, its hull scarred from 100 battles across the galaxy's forgotten conflicts. "Devourers, huh?" He grinned, showing teeth that had been replaced with titanium after his last encounter with hostile aliens. "Haven't tangled with those bastards in, 6 months? Lieutenant Commander Yuki Tanaka, his tactical officer, looked up from her console with the expression of someone who'd just received wonderful news. Estimated enemy fleet composition: 300 Harvester-class vessels, 50 Breaker-class siege ships, and 1 World Eater. A World Eater? Kowalski's grin widened. Sarah didn't mention they'd brought one of the big boys. Around the bridge, the crew began their pre-battle rituals. Sergeant First Class James Tiny Washington, all 7 feet and 300 pounds, of him was quietly singing an old Earth spiritual while checking his weapons. Ensign Patricia Chen, no relation to the Admiral, was methodically braiding Lucky Charms into her hair, each one representing a species she'd helped save. The human response to imminent death had always puzzled the galaxy's other sapient species. Where rational beings felt fear, humans felt anticipation. Sir, Communications Officer Liu reported, the research station is requesting clarification on our intentions. They're asking what we meant by not sending help. Kowalski considered this. Tell them we're sending them the one thing humans do better than anyone else in this galaxy, which is violence. The Ragnarok wasn't alone. Through the viewports, the rest of the human fleet was taking position, 37 ships in total, each one a veteran of the Outer Rim Wars. They were outnumbered nearly 10-1, which by human standards meant the odds were almost fair. Captain, Tanaka called out, we're receiving a transmission from the Devourer flagship. They're demanding we withdraw immediately. Put it through. The main screen filled with writhing biomechanical horror. The Devourer hierarchs were creatures that had long ago replaced their organic parts with living metal, becoming something between a machine and a cancer. When it spoke, its voice was like the sound of worlds dying. Human vessels. Your species is quarantined. Depart this space or be consumed. Kowalski stood up slowly, straightening his uniform. He'd worn the same jacket through the siege of New Geneva, the Battle of Proxima's Gate, and the liberation of the Crying Worlds. It was more scar tissue than fabric at this point, but it had never failed him. This is Captain Marcus Kowalski, of the Terran Defense Corps, he said, his voice carrying the weight of a species that had clawed its way from the caves to the stars. You have 30 seconds to withdraw from this system before we demonstrate why the Galactic Council keeps us locked away. The hierarchs made a sound like grinding metal. You are 37 ships. We are Legion. Yeah, Kowalski nodded. That's what the Hegemony said, and the Stellar Empire, and the Void Cult. He paused, letting his smile turn predatory. You know what they all have in common? Elaborate. They don't exist anymore. The transmission cut out. Around the bridge, weapon systems hummed to life with the sound of barely contained destruction. All ships, this is Ragnarok Actual, Kowalski announced on the fleet channel. Remember, we're not here to win. We're here to send a message. Let's make sure every devourer in the galaxy knows what happens when they threaten our friends. Sir, Tanaka reported, the enemy fleet is beginning their approach. Time to weapons range, 12 minutes. Kowalski settled back into his captain's chair, feeling the familiar calm that came before battle. Around him, his crew prepared for war with the focused intensity that had made humanity the most feared species in the galaxy. On the research station, Commander Zara was probably wondering what kind of help was coming. She was about to find out. Chapter 3. When Deathworlders Hunt. The first indication that humanity approached warfare differently came when the Devourer vanguard simply disappeared. Commander. Zara watched her tactical display in confusion as 12 enemy ships, each the size of a small moon, winked out of existence one by one. No explosion, no debris field, no energy signature. They were there, then they weren't. What just happened? She asked her tactical officer. Dr. Thrinodi's crystalline form was cycling through colors rapidly, indicating extreme confusion. I'm reading gravitational anomalies throughout the system. It's as if space itself is folding. The answer came from an unexpected source. One of the human ships, a sleek vessel that had been hiding behind an asteroid, decloaked directly in front of the research station. Its hull was pitch black, seeming to absorb sensor scans and light equally. Text along its side read, UES Shadow of Intent. A new voice crackled over their communications, this one female and carrying an Irish accent thick enough to cut with a knife. Harmony's Edge. This is Captain Bridget O'Malley of the Shadow. You might want to tell your people to stop looking directly at the enemy fleet for the next few minutes. Trust me on this one." "Why?" Zara asked, but she was already giving the order. "Because we're about to demonstrate why humans don't believe in fair fights. What happened next would be analyzed by military theorists for centuries to come. The human fleet didn't charge the enemy line like honorable warriors. They didn't attempt to establish communication or offer terms of surrender. Instead, they did something that made every civilized species in the galaxy recoil in horror. They cheated. The shadow of intent. Fired first, but its weapon wasn't a laser or missile. It was a focused burst of artificial black hole particles that tore through spacetime itself, creating a gravity well that pulled a dozen devourer ships into a single point and compressed them into exotic matter. The UES Mjolnir followed up with something the human database cheerfully called a planet cracker, a weapon designed to shatter worlds, now turned against the enemy fleet. The energy beam punched through 15 ships in a single shot, their biomechanical hulls offering no more resistance than tissue paper. But it was the UES Pandora's box that truly demonstrated human philosophy. Instead of attacking the enemy directly, it deployed thousands of small pods that attached themselves to devourer ships like parasites. Within seconds, the pods began broadcasting something that made the biomechanical creatures writhe in apparent agony. "What are those pods doing?" Dr. Kelris asked, his reptilian features pale with shock. Captain O'Malley's voice carried a note of dark satisfaction. "Broadcasting human music, death metal specifically. Turns out biomechanical neural networks really don't like 9-minute guitar solos." The Devourer fleet, which had swept across the galaxy like an unstoppable force of nature, began to break apart, not from weapons fire, but from what could only be described as a collective nervous breakdown. But the humans weren't done. The U.S. Ragnarok launched its fighters, not to engage in honorable dogfights, but to scatter throughout the enemy formation, carrying what appeared to be party supplies. The moment they were in position, every human ship in the fleet simultaneously broadcast the same message. "Attention, Devourer hierarchs. This is Admiral Sarah Chen. You are hereby invited to surrender, unconditionally, or we will be forced to deploy our most devastating weapon." The lead hierarch's response was predictably hostile. What weapon could possibly? The transmission was cut off by what sounded like laughter. Human laughter, broadcast across every frequency simultaneously. But it wasn't cruel or mocking. It was the sound of a species that found joy in the face of impossible odds, that celebrated every small victory against an uncaring universe. The psychological effect on the Devourers was immediate and catastrophic. A species that had evolved to feed on fear and despair couldn't comprehend creatures that literally laughed at death. Their formation began to collapse as individual ships fled in random directions, their crews apparently unable to process what they were experiencing. "Status report," Zara whispered, hardly daring to believe what she was seeing. "The enemy fleet is withdrawing," Threnody reported, his voice carrying wonder. "No, not withdrawing, fleeing. They're actually fleeing." Through the viewport, the human fleet was regrouping with casual efficiency. They'd just defeated a force 10 times their size without losing a single ship, and they were acting like it was routine. Captain O'Malley's voice came through again, warm with satisfaction. "Harmony's Edge, this is Shadow. Enemy fleet has been neutralized. We'll be sticking around for a few hours to make sure they don't come back. Tease on if anyone wants to come aboard for a chat." Zara found herself laughing, actually laughing for the first time since the crisis began. "Captain O'Malley, I think I speak for everyone when I say we'd very much like to understand what just happened." "Simple enough," the human replied. "You called for help. We don't really do help, but we do war, and we do it better than anyone else in the galaxy. Sometimes that's the same thing." As the last of the Devourer ships disappeared into hyperspace, Zara realized she was witnessing something unprecedented. The moment the galaxy's greatest threat met the species that evolution had designed specifically to be everybody else's worst nightmare. The Devourers had just learned what the Galactic Council already knew. There was a very good reason humanity was kept quarantined. It wasn't to protect the galaxy from humans. It was to protect the galaxy's enemies from what humans would do to them. Chapter 4. The Price of Salvation, 3 hours. After the battle, Commander Zara Vexhai found herself aboard the human flagship UES Ragnarok, surrounded by creatures that her species' evolutionary instincts screamed were predators. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd never felt safer in her life. Admiral Sarah Chen was smaller than Zara had expected, barely reaching the Kythera's shoulder despite Zara being considered short for her species. But there was something in the human's eyes that spoke of depths unfathomed, of decisions made in the dark places between stars where civilization's light couldn't reach. "You're probably wondering about the cost," Admiral Chen said, pouring tea from an earth-made ceramic pot. The liquid was dark and bitter but somehow comforting. "The Council will demand explanations. They'll want to know why we violated the quarantine, why we interfered in galactic politics." Zara wrapped her 4 hands around the warm cup, finding the ritual soothing despite its alien nature. Around them, the Ragnarok's bridge hummed with quiet efficiency. Human crew members moved with the casual competence of apex predators in their natural environment. "The Council has always been afraid of us," Chen continued. "Not because we're violent. Half the galaxy's species are more aggressive than humans. They're afraid because we're effective at violence. There's a difference." "I don't understand," Zara admitted. "Today you saved 26 species, thousands of researchers. Why would they punish you for that?" Captain Kowalski, who'd been quietly cleaning his sidearm, looked up with a grim smile. "Because now every species in the galaxy knows we can be reasoned with. That will come when called if the cause is just. That makes us unpredictable, and unpredictable predators make politicians nervous." Dr. Threnody, who'd been unusually quiet since coming aboard, finally chimed with a frequency that registered as confusion. "But surely the Council will see reason. The Devourers were going to destroy everything. You saved us." Admiral Chen set down her teacup with the careful precision of someone who'd learned that small gestures carried great weight. "Doctor, let me tell you about the last time humanity tried to help." The bridge fell silent except for the low hum of the ship's systems. 50 years ago, the hegemony was committing genocide against the peaceful worlds, 7 systems full of species that had never known war. The Council debated for months while billions died. We asked permission to intervene. They refused, so we did it anyway. Zara felt her stomach twist. "What happened?" "We ended the genocide in 3 weeks, saved over 40 billion lives, delivered the hegemony's war criminals to the Council for trial." Chen's voice was steady, professional. "The Council's response was to extend our quarantine indefinitely and classify humanity as a rogue species." "That's insane," Kelrus hissed, his reptilian features twisting with indignation. "You were heroes." "We were effective," Kowalski corrected. "That's what made us dangerous. The Council's power comes from being the only ones capable of organizing large-scale military actions. If everyone knows humans will do it faster and better, what do they need the Council for?" Zara was beginning to understand the true scope of what had happened today. "So by saving us, you've painted a target on our backs?" "Yeah." Admiral Chen smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "The Council will probably extend the quarantine to our entire arm of the galaxy. Maybe impose trade sanctions. If we're lucky, and if you're unlucky, they'll declare us a threat to galactic stability and authorize military action against Earth," Chen said matter-of-factly, "which would be unfortunate for everyone involved." The casual way she said it sent chills down Zara's spine. She was beginning to realize that the human fleet that had just saved them represented a tiny fraction of their species' true capabilities. "So why did you help us?" Threnody asked. "Knowing the cost?" Chen stood and walked to the viewport, looking out at the research station where teams were already working to repair the damage. In the distance, a few human ships maintained patrol patterns, standing guard against the darkness. "Because that's what we do," she said simply. 50,000 years ago, our ancestors looked up at the night sky and decided the stars belonged to everyone, not just the strong, Not just the clever, not just the ones with the biggest fleets. Everyone. She turned back to face them, and Zara saw something in her expression that she'd never seen before in any sapient being, a complete lack of doubt about the rightness of her actions. The council thinks we're dangerous because we don't calculate the political cost of doing what's right. They're not wrong. We are dangerous. We're dangerous to anyone who thinks might makes right, that the weak exist to serve the strong, that some lives matter more than others. Zara felt something shift inside her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the tea. What happens now? Now you go back to your research, Chen replied. You make amazing discoveries, push the boundaries of knowledge, make the galaxy a better place. And if the Devourers come back, or the next bunch of genocidal maniacs, or the one after that? She smiled, and this time it did reach her eyes. You call us again, even knowing what it will cost you, especially knowing what it will cost us. As they prepared to leave the human ship, Zara realized she'd learned something today that would change how her species viewed the universe. The galaxy wasn't just full of predators and prey, civilized species and monsters. It was also home to something rarer and more dangerous than either. It was home to guardians. And guardians, she was beginning to understand, were the most terrifying predators of all. Epilogue: The Ripple Effect. 6 months later. The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with tension as representatives from 1,000 worlds debated humanity's fate. The great amphitheater, carved from a single asteroid and polished to mirror brightness, had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. Today it might witness the judgment of the galaxy's most controversial species. High Counselor Vexthan, a being of pure energy contained within a crystalline matrix, spoke with the weight of eons behind his words. The motion before us is clear. Humanity has violated the terms of their quarantine. They have interfered in galactic affairs without authorization. The question is not whether they acted. It is what we do about it. The assembled representatives murmured among themselves in a dozen different languages and communication methods. Some, like the militaristic Thanagari, called for immediate action against the Deathworld threat. Others, primarily the trade-focused species, worried about the economic implications of war with a species that had just demonstrated terrifying military efficiency. But in the observers' gallery, a different conversation was taking place. Commander, Zara Vexhai sat with representatives from 47 different species, every single one that had been aboard the research station, Harmony's Edge. They weren't officially part of the council proceedings, but their presence spoke volumes. Tawi, motion is called, High Counselor Vexthan announced. All in favor of declaring humanity a rogue species and authorizing military intervention? The voting began. The Thanagari Empire, aye. The Corporate Syndicate, aye. The Hegemony Remnants, aye. But then something unprecedented happened. The Cathara, Republic votes nay, Zara announced, standing despite the fact that her species held only a minor council seat, and formally requests to address the council. A ripple of shock went through the chamber. Minor species didn't interrupt council votes. They certainly didn't make formal addresses without prior authorization. High Counselor Vexthan's energy form flickered with annoyance. This is highly irregular. The Silicari Collective also votes nay, Dr. Threnody chimed, his crystalline form resonating with harmonics that carried throughout the chamber. We also request to address the council. The Vazaki Federation votes nay, Dr. Kelrus added, his reptilian voice carrying surprising authority. One by one, every species that had been on the research station stood and cast their vote against the motion. 47 species representing nearly 2 billion sentient beings, all speaking with one voice. The chamber fell silent. High Counselor Vexthan seemed to gather himself. This is unprecedented. The council recognizes Commander Vexahai of the Cathara Republic. Zara walked to the center of the great amphitheater, her forearms steady despite the magnitude of the moment. Around her, the representatives of 1,000 worlds watched and waited. Honored counselors, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. 6 months ago, my research station faced annihilation by the Devourers. We sent distress calls to every civilized species in the galaxy. The responses were predictable. She activated a holographic display showing the communication logs. The Altrurian Republic offered thoughts and prayers. The Ethereal Collective suggested we evacuate to designated refugee camps. The corporate syndicate offered to purchase our research data at fair market value before the station was destroyed. Uncomfortable. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Only one species responded with action. Only one species was willing to risk everything to save people they'd never met, representing civilizations they had no political ties with, for no reward except the knowledge that it was the right thing to do. She gestured toward the observers' gallery where Admiral Chen sat quietly watching the proceedings. The humans didn't send a rescue mission. They sent their entire available fleet. They didn't calculate the political cost or the strategic implications. They simply came when called. Which is precisely why they're dangerous, interjected Counselor Thexmari of the Thanagari Empire, his armored form gleaming under the chamber's lights. Unpredictable predators with superior military technology are exactly what this galaxy needs, Zara interrupted, causing another shocked silence. Counselor Thexmari, when was the last time your empire faced a threat you couldn't handle with overwhelming force? The warrior diplomat's mandibles clicked with irritation. That's irrelevant. 17 years ago, Zara continued relentlessly. The Void Plague. Your empire lost 37 colonies before you finally requested council assistance. The council debated for 4 months while your people died. In the end, it was human mercenaries, operating illegally outside the quarantine, who developed the countermeasure that saved your empire. She turned to address the entire chamber. How many crises has this council failed to resolve because we were too concerned with protocol, too afraid of setting precedents, too invested in maintaining the status quo? How many billions have died while we debated? High Counselor Vexthan's energy form pulsed with barely contained anger. The council maintains order. The council maintains control, Admiral Chen said, standing in the observer's gallery. Her voice was quiet, but it carried throughout the chamber with perfect clarity. There's a difference. The chamber erupted in chaos as hundreds of representatives began speaking at once. Some demanded the human be silenced. Others called for order. And a few, a growing few, began asking uncomfortable questions about the council's track record. When the noise finally died down, High Counselor Vexthan spoke with the weight of absolute authority. Admiral Chen, you were not given permission to address this council. I wasn't asking for permission, Chen replied calmly. I was stating a fact. The question before this council isn't whether humanity violated the quarantine. We did. The question is whether you're going to do something about it. Is that a threat? No. Chen smiled, and every predatory species in the chamber recognized the expression. It's an offer. She gestured toward the display showing the aftermath of the battle against the Devourers. The galaxy is full of threats that can't be stopped by committees and trade sanctions. The Devourers were just the beginning. Out there in the dark, there are things that make them look like a minor inconvenience. And you propose to what? Appoint yourselves the galaxy's protectors? We propose to do what we've always done, Chen replied. When someone calls for help, we answer. When someone needs protection, we provide it. When someone threatens the innocent, we stop them. The only question is whether we do it with the council's blessing or in spite of it. The chamber fell silent as the implication sank in. Humanity wasn't asking for permission. They were offering partnership. High Counselor, Vexthan's energy form dimmed as he processed this. And if we refuse? If we choose to enforce the quarantine? Admiral Chen's smile widened slightly. Then you'll learn what the Devourers learned. There's a reason evolution made us the way we are, High Counselor. We're very, very good at war. The vote, when it finally came, was closer than anyone expected. The motion to declare humanity a rogue species failed by exactly 47 votes, the exact number of species that had been aboard the research station. But the real victory came with the second motion, proposed by Commander Zara herself, to formally recognize humanity as the galaxy's emergency response force, with the authority to act when the Council couldn't or wouldn't. It passed by a single vote. As the representatives filed out of the chamber, Admiral Chen found herself approached by High Counselor Vexthon. The ancient being's energy form flickered with what might have been amusement. "You realize this changes everything," he said. "The balance of power, the political structures, the very nature of galactic civilization." "Yes," Chen nodded. "We're counting on it. And if you abuse this authority, if humanity becomes the very threat the Council feared," Chen considered this seriously, "then I suppose you'll have to call for help. Lucky for you, we know some people who are really good at stopping threats to galactic peace." As she walked away, Admiral Chen allowed herself a small smile. Humanity had just gone from quarantined curiosity to the galaxy's official guardians. The universe had just become a much more interesting place, and somewhere in the dark between the stars, ancient threats that had slumbered for millennia began to stir, drawn by the scent of a species that had just announced to the galaxy that some lines could not be crossed. The real war was just beginning. But then again, that's what humans did best. End.